Okay. All right, so we're live, and I will let everybody in from the waiting room. We got a good number of folks joining us. Hello, everyone.
Well, hello.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'll
Wow.
make sure that anybody else can join
A
if they
robot.
choose.
Larry Noble. Hey, man.
Wonderful. I
Well,
see.
look at all these humans. Hey, Linda Kay.
Yeah, Linda Kay, as usual, on her sunny destination beach there, as always.
Yeah.
And Yuha's there. Hi, Yuha. Cy Schuster's over here.
Hey, Harold.
Is he
Wow.
wearing a headband? That is pretty cool. Maybe his hair grew too long or something.
Jürgen Goring is here. Hello, darling.
Yes, nice. Very cool. All right, well, I think we're live online and we got started. So should we hit the ground? Maybe I'll give a little intro of our.
Well, let's, yeah.
I can tell the sponsor first, and then we can jump into it.
Yeah, do that.
Okay, cool. So thank you all for being here. And just a quick reminder that Piano Tech Radio Hour is being brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online educational resource that offers you cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at www.pianotechniciansmasterclass.com and find whatever option suits you to sign up and join us. All right, David, yes, what are you about
So,
to introduce for us?
approximately 25 minutes before 11 Pacific time, before 2 Eastern time, we got a text from Boaz Kirschenbaum, our guest today, saying, "My head is filled up with a cold. I can't talk. I can only croak. I'm going to have to, I can't even hardly sit up. I'm really, really sick. I'm so, so sorry. I feel terrible, but I can't, I don't think I can go. I think I'm too sick." And so we said, "No problem, get better." He got COVID tested, worried about it. He'll know in the next couple of days. I'll sending him good energy. And so we're just going to have a tool talk, man. I want the wisdom of this room. Look at all these insane. We got 300 million years of piano technological, experience in this little room, in this little Zoom event.
Is that a full eon? Is that a
Yeah,
full
an
eon's worth of
eon,
years?
or many eons.
Many eons.
Um, and I want some really, like the last time you were working on a piano and you were trying to get it just right, and you just couldn't get it right, or you figured something out that did get it right, or something. I would love to have some questions about the finer aspects of regulation, tuning, voicing, diagnostics, coming to a piano and figuring out what the hell is going on with this piano. Why does it do this and this and this and this and this? And do
Rob
not,
Huberman has jumped in already, and he says that he wants to talk about his chopstick voicing tool shaped like yours.
okay, talk to Mr. Jürgen Goering about his chopstick voicing tool. And remember the secret kind of protocol. I put in a long needle for chopstick voicing, at least 15 millimeters, extending from the needle. And then I bend it up at a 10 or 12 degree angle so that I can get under the string low. The bent knee works just between and it's right to air. all the way under.
I'm going to unmute Carl here because he's the one who introduced this. I don't know if this is going on for anybody else, but is you getting it frozen, David?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Just nothing.
Yeah. Why don't you give your side of things here, Carl, for a second?
Well, no, listen, I want to reiterate what I learned this from David, and I bend it a little bit more. Again, a half an inch, 15 millimeters. I bend it probably 15 degrees, maybe even 20 degrees. And yesterday I serviced a brand new C7 where the complaint was two of the bass notes just had like a little bit extra high frequency buzz. And a brand new C7. And I used David's thing. I put a tube under the string cuts on the two bass notes. And if you flip it over, the needle is now pointing down a little. And if you want to do just like a little sugar coating within the grooves, just tiny, tiny sugar coating to just make it a little sweeter at the top. I used my chopstick voicing tool like David configured it. And I had the happiest client. It just absolutely solved the problem. So lots of times it's hard for me to use my chopstick voicer. It's set up for the hammer to go into check and then to spike it when it's in check. It's much easier to just kind of slide underneath the grooves, and bending the needle is the key.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. I put a thing in the chat. If anybody actually has it on hand, you're welcome to hold it up. We mentioned that actually maybe Jürgen is on board. I don't know how available he is, but and Mark Steiger says, I just bought Jürgen's chopstick voicing tool. Used it for the first time on Thursday. Fantastic. Very nice. Whoa, Carl just did a relay. He's zooming in and out of the Zoom screen here. I guess that's appropriate for Zoom. I'm assuming he ran to go get his chopstick voicing tool.
Yeah, I am.
Nice.
Here, so listen, that's the needle. I don't know if people can see that, Ethan.
Now, if I talk, it'll probably make you off screen for a second, but hold it up in front of your face more, in front of where the camera is.
Yeah.
And put it in front of your face.
Oh, let me just put
good.
Behind here.
There you go.
Can you see it? This is a magic trick, bending the needle. David taught me this. I can't tell you how useful this made my chopstick voicing tool. I mean, it's really, really an improvement.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think we got a good look at it.
Good.
And by the way, I don't know if everyone knows, you can pin someone's video. If you select on their image, there's a ... You can pin their video. If anybody's ever showing anything, you want to take a closer look. It's probably the best way to do it. We got David Anderson back on board here. He's asking me to unmute him, so I'll do that.
You had me muted.
Yeah, welcome back, David.
Am I back now?
Yes.
You filthy. You muted me. Is this some kind of a...
Phil Bondi is also showing us his
oh, wow.
chopstick voicing tool.
Right.
But he does not have it bent, which is...
That's troubling. That's very troubling. No, you got to bend it up to really get the full advantage of this beautiful...
Bowing. He's bowing.
I stole this from Udo Steingraber. He said, this is a good trick. He said, this is a good thing. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, you retain the string cuts, but you do exactly what smacking out the string cuts with a sugar, what do you call it? Sugar coating voicing tool does. It kind of tears the string cuts up, and you don't want to do that. We had a long conversation last week with Eric Johnson about you don't want to take, when you file hammers, you don't want to take the string cuts out. You just want to make them from long from 10 millimeters long to 2 or 3 millimeters long, and you want them to be very shallow. You don't want to take them all the way out, because good players, Eric taught a class someplace, some kind of expanded class via Zoom someplace, and he had this player on, the last famous player, the last 20 minutes, and he talked about how he would play on and off the string cuts for different numbers. So I believe the string cuts are necessary, and if you obliterate them, it's not good. Anybody else have thoughts about that? Disagree with me, or have thoughts about?
I have a question that came up, and that is during one of our sessions when we were reviewing the Boaz lectures on Wednesdays. We were talking about hammer filing and talking about how, you know, it's interesting to understand that the string cuts are useful and the pianist might use them for nuances in their playing, as we talked about last week. Question is, if the hammers are severely off center from the strings, and then you go in to do a filing of the hammers, then do you want to get rid of the string cuts before you align the hammers to the strings so that you
if the hammers are like ridiculously misaligned with the strings, it's a different story. You have to build your own new string cuts at the right place, because alignment and hammer to string mating takes precedence.
Right. And then there was also another tip that came in when we were talking about that, that if you want to deepen the string cuts a little bit, you can, you know, insulate your hand from getting the oils on the strings, but you press down on whatever strings.
And then pound the hell out of the string with,
the hell out of the strings.
smack it at triple forte or whatever for about 20 seconds. And that's the insane recovery. Like if you go too far with the tube of air under the string cut, you can just put your thumb on the string and just pound the heck out of it for 10 or 15 times. And it's like the equivalent of 4 or 5 hours of playing on that note. So you can not take it all the way out, but take it a lot of the way out. Take that early edge out, right? Because here's the deal. Here's another deal that really confuses piano technicians, I think. You get the piano voiced, and it sounds so beautiful and so warm to you, and so clear and so sweet. But then somebody hears you playing it that's 4, 5, 6 feet away from the piano, and they say, wow, it's a little too soft.
Mm.
And I want you to really understand, that's why sometimes artists and performers aren't happy with the so-called softer hammers voiced, quote, warmer, unquote, because it doesn't have that pop. Even at low volume, they need to feel like, bam, it smacked the string a little bit. It should be very golden at low volume, but it should still be there. And there should absolutely be a kinesthetic pop, like almost a feeling of a snap when you play the note on any piano that's set up for performance, much past mezzo forte and certainly into forte. You want some, what I call kinesthetic snap. You don't want to dull that initial ping, because serious players love that. If you take it away from them, they'll be angry. Ask me how I know. I have made several abject failures in that realm. Anybody else? Anybody else gotten fired for over voicing or weird voicing or anything like that?
It was interesting in Sally Phillips' lecture that we have in the library, where she talks about concert prep, and what I was fascinated with is and I was there too in person too, just like the brightness of the piano on the stage, you know, right there in front of the pianist. You're almost like, oh my God, this is kind of crazy how bright and poppy, and it's really in your face, and it's really almost abrasive. But how she talked about, well, you need that sound locally in order for it to mix in the hall properly and come out rich and soft, and and
especially with Steinway hammers, especially with Steinway hammers, especially with hammers that have been built up with hardness. It's that maybe too ringy, springy sound at low volume, so that at 30 feet out in the audience, it sounds nice and warm. It doesn't sound like it does on the player's end. That's the point I'm trying to get to. What the piano sounds like to you from the player's side may be strikingly different than what anybody who's going to hear the piano hears. And
for me as a musician, go ahead.
Well, and part of it is just education process for the player, Say, all right, go out and stand 4 feet away from the rim and listen to me play the piano. And then put your head in the piano. It's brighter than you think. It speaks more than you think. It's an awesome sound. It's different. The sound is different. The piano psychoacoustically feels different from most pianos, from the player's end to the recording end, or the microphone end, or the listener's end.
What I was going to say is, as a person playing, music, I've played electronic keyboards, with the band, with electric guitars and electric bass and all of the synth instruments and things like that. Also played with the big band, and I actually find it very difficult just as a musician to reconcile the sound that I hear locally with what people are hearing out in the audience. What I always notice when I'm up on stage, I'm like, this must be terrible. This is too loud, and this is a problem. But as a musician, or even as someone preparing pianos, you have to understand. You have to have a deep understanding of how location relates to sound. Everything that you hear up close, whatever's closer, you hear louder, right? Whatever's farther away, you hear more softly. So that's important to consider. And it's also important to go out, like if I am a keyboard player in a rock band or something, or in a big band, piano player, to have someone go play the piano and me go out in the audience and say, oh, okay, actually I need to play even louder. That's a big issue with pianos in a big band setting. It's like I can hardly hear myself at all in the first place. So yeah, that's a really good point, the discrepancies. Can I introduce Larry, in case he wants to share? Larry Lobel, do you still have something maybe you want to share about your usage with the chopstick tool there? Yeah, tell us about that.
Okay, I believe this is the chopstick voicer that Jürgen sells. Though I didn't buy it from Jürgen, I got it at a Fazioli class at a convention, and I think Fazioli was the first to come out with this. And it looks like a pen.
Oh, that's another kind. Yeah, I have that kind too.
Yeah, it's got a cylinder which is released by, you press the button on the top and it releases this cylinder and it comes all the way out. Yeah. So for storage, you have the pin going inside so it doesn't stab you. And it stores nicely that way. And then when you want to use it, you just reverse the cylinder and stick it in the pen. And this is held by some jaws that clamp it and hold it very tightly. It doesn't slip out. And you can put it at any length, any position that you need it. And then if you ever need to, if the needle breaks or if you need to change it, it's just held in with some CA glue. So you can use the solvent for CA glue and then glue in another pin. And I find that much more manageable than trying to deal with those microscopic set screws which have become harder and harder with failing
Oh,
vision. and
yeah,
finger
tell me
clarity.
again how you do it, brother. Tell me again how you do it real quick.
We see it.
The needle is held in into the cylinder here with CA glue.
Uh-huh.
And you just glue it in. And then,
And then
if
there's
you
a solvent
change
you can use to get it. When you want to take it out, you just use the solvent, take it out, and then put the gauge in.
that's right.
Wow.
And so it's got a reach of about, extended all the way out. It's more than a foot long, but you can retract it so that it's just about 6 inches long. And I use it in the short way for little sugar coating in the grooves. This is the most wonderful tool. It's been a real boon for me. So that's the one Jürgen sells.
That's
I'm pretty
great.
sure.
Cool.
He
Yeah,
sells two different-
Jürgen confirmed that he does sell this one in the
Okay.
chat as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
He
and
held
he,
up a different one, Carl. Yeah.
I don't know if he still sells the one that I have, but he did for a number of years. I want somebody to tell me a challenge they've had in the last 30 days
Thank you, Larry.
when they were working on a piano and they couldn't get something right, either about the tuning, the voicing, the regulation, the setup, whatever. They couldn't figure something out. Come on, be bold.
Well, this crowd, no, everybody's perfect. I don't know. That's not a great question. Nobody makes mistakes here or has any problems to solve.
Please. I say a lot of times in my class, I don't have closets full of skeletons. I have.
Okay, I'm curious. So Cy Schuster said he introduced a topic, but he also said something earlier, which I was curious about. Apparently, he coded computer programming in COBOL back when you put punches in a piece of paper. And that was the same type of tool he used. It was a pencil. It looked like the mechanical pencil with like a punch at the end. That's fascinating. But he also said he's terrible at keyframe betting. And that is not a bad topic to bring up. Just kind of
Great thing to bring up.
how the heck do you get that right?
Yeah.
And efficiently and quickly too, so it doesn't take forever. First thing that comes to mind is that device that you show in your lecture, actually, on in your How to Make a Piano Sing lecture.
Yes.
It's a device from
WNG.
WNG. Yeah, and you get to set it on top of the action, and it has a little gauge, and
It's just idiot proof. It's literally idiot proof. You set it on the action in a certain way that they give you instructions for, and then you lift up on the glide bolt or you screw it up, and as soon as you see any movement,
yeah,
at all, you're at it's easy. It's the easiest for my weak hands. It's certainly the easiest protocol.
I'll take over for what people might have missed, David, because you cut out again. Your internet's a little weak today.
Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you can reiterate it, but I think what people missed is it's a device. It's got a little gauge on the front of it. Looks like a clock, or maybe the tire pressure gauge on a good quality tire pump, bike tire pump, and you just set it on top of the action. It's got a little adjustable, movable thing that's on a spring attached to it that comes into contact with the bottom of the key bed, and it allows you to rotate the tuning pin like objects. I forget the glide bolts, if you want to call them the glide bolts.
Yeah.
Glide bolt adjusters until you see that gauge stop moving, and that allows you to know when there's a transition between it coming into contact with the key bed and not. And then you just kind of move that gauge around and adjust the various glide bolts. You don't have to do any knocking or tapping or anything like that. You don't have to take the keys out of the piano.
You have to pick you don't have to pick the keyframe up with your fingers. You don't have to do any of that stuff. It's super simple and super elegantly precise as well.
Now I'm curious, Sai, did you know about that W&G betting tool? You can mention it in the chat. But yeah, it seems pretty, seems quite effective. And again, if anybody has it like right on hand, they're welcome to bring it on camera. And Carl seems to somehow have all his tools very organized and within arm's reach. He's setting up again. I'm pretty impressed with that. But let's I'll go on to the next comments here first until he might come back with it. Let's see. Moving capstans. Let's see. Moving capstans. What do we think? Should we ask for some clarification on what that means?
That means that's a challenge for that person.
Right.
I imagine.
Yeah.
A challenge for a lot of people. That's why they don't do it.
Oh, moving capstans on the key, not raising them up and down, but actually moving
exactly.
the key. Oh, yeah. That
Yeah.
sounds very frightening. Oh, Carl's got a tool. He's going to hold it up here to the camera. I'll pin his video. Yeah, you can hold it in front of yourself, actually, because you have a dark background. There you go. And it just, those little feet sit
Am I unmuted? Let me say something about this.
Yeah, go.
You know, I also, in the Yamaha class, when they're talking about stage pianos that are well regulated, and you get there and there isn't quite enough aftertouch, they say, rather than raising the hammer line and taking away power, what's happened is the key bed has moved. And what you should do is push down the glide bolts and raise up the keys, because to the 10 millimeters they were supposed to be. On this gauge, 4/1000ths of an inch equals a 1/10 of a millimeter at the key height, but 2/10 of a millimeter at the dip. You can get a lot of extra aftertouch. So when I have a piano where I don't quite have enough aftertouch, I will go in and I will take like the 3 center glide bolts, and with this gauge, I'll turn them down like 2/1000ths of an inch, 3/1000ths of an inch. It's not going to give you a knock. It's not going to cause anything, but it's going to get you a little extra aftertouch really easily.
Right.
The glide bolts, if you look at the old Steinway manual, were called TR screws, and the TR stood for touch regulation screws. I mean, we have this idea that it's verboten to actually use these things to mess with the touch. I mean, you don't want to overdo it. This is a very subtle thing, but you can improve the touch a little bit by just depressing the glide bolts. And this W&G tool lets you do it in a very calibrated way.
You know,
that's exactly right.
And David, I think this is also just useful from the general topic that you brought up in the very beginning. I think this was when we started, not beforehand, but you were talking about, you know, what's the final 10%? You know, what is the exacting things that you really do to bring a piano into shape? And I can see that something like this, you know, having this tool and something like Carl is talking about, it's very subtle knowledge, and it's a very subtle action that you can take to change things. But that seems like it falls in the category of that kind of final 10% things.
It absolutely does. The most important part of the 10% in terms of regulation, I think, is just general evenness of the action, but even more, evenness of the aftertouch. Player after player after player after player, hundreds of players have told me, yeah, as long as the bump is the same for every note, as long as playing super soft, I can play through that bump and it feels the same on every note, I'm good. So getting the aftertouch exactly to match in terms of your fingers feel from the sharp is, you know, only the tier 1 guys get that right every, like maybe 60, 70% of the time. There's a lot of times there's a discrepancy in new 50, 60, 70, $90,000 pianos between the aftertouch distance on the sharps and the aftertouch distance on the naturals. And it's not so much distance. I don't care about that. It's feeling. The feeling is different. And finally, and you can speak to this way better than I can, Carl, Yamaha now teaches in the Little Red Schoolhouse that aftertouch is a feel thing. You can measure what you can measure, but aftertouch in the final analysis is a feel thing. So how do you get it? How do you make that balance of raising blow distance a little bit and not getting the key travel more than 10.2 millimeters or less than 10? Those are the sacred parameters that players like. They like it around 10, a little bit more than 10. So how do you do that?
Listen, I always like to take the easiest path. And a little tiny tweak of the capstan and slightly raising the hammer line, if it makes the aftertouch feel more even, that's what I do. It's so much
exactly
easier than
right.
mixing with the punchings or.
That's right, and it doesn't add anything except it takes away maybe a 0.5 millimeter of blow distance. Not enough with most pianos to make any significant difference. So you have that little slack area. I agree, Carl. That's exactly what I do too. I'd much rather, subtly mess with the blow distance than I would with the key travel. I like to have the key travel pretty sacred. Phil Bondi, chime in on that, man. I know you regulate and do that final step on a lot of pianos. So can you unmute Mr. Bondi, Mr. James?
I have selected to ask to unmute him, and I think he has to confirm. There he goes.
All right.
Am I on now?
You're on.
Go on.
No, that's it, David. I have the pleasure of working with someone from the East Coast too, who basically sets up the pianos that I use in Naples. There's 2 Ds and a C7, and between the two of us, we have them dialed in pretty good. He usually comes over once a year about this time, just goes through everything, and then during the season, pretty much my job is like those little. Oh, that little tube voicing that you were talking about, or that minor touch on the capstans or on the capstans more than anything. And I'm very fortunate to be working with someone from Steinway who knows all these little tricks too. So yes, everything that's being said so far is in practice here.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. Anybody else? I'm really wanting to hear the wisdom of this room. So any other tips and tricks you have about this final process, that'd be great.
I got a message here, is private, so let me just read it here and see if there's something we can do. It was from Mark Campbell. He said, in regards to capstans, he may have missed the question, but if we'd like to have him, I think, join the call later, we can discuss it. He works with action geometry quite a bit. So I think the question was generally moving capstans, like, how do you go about it and make sure that, I would be afraid to mess it up. I think that would be probably you want to end up with things better than when you started, not worse. And I think that would probably be my biggest concern.
Well,
see if I'm going to ask to unmute Sai, and if you have anything to share, go for it. If not, then we can move on and you can tell us when you're ready.
I was just gonna, getting back to keyframe bedding, oftentimes I get to the glides and the tool that I have doesn't reach down to the top of the glide bolt, or your tuning hammer doesn't get in there, or it's got a screw top. It's like, what are the 3 or 4 most common tools that you need to get to most of the glide bolts to adjust those stupid things?
great question.
And I just want to make another comment, Sai. I think you have an amazing outfit today. And your home is like filled with some Asian flair, and you're wearing a tie-dye t-shirt and a headband.
I'm working on Carl Lieberman hair. I'm not. I aspire someday to be at that point. The other thing I wanted to share for y'all, I love analogies, and I came up with this great analogy. A piano is a harp with a typewriter under it.
There you go.
Pianos don't need tuning. Nobody was ever blocked from practicing or performing because the piano was out of tune. But if that damn typewriter doesn't work, you're toast. So that's what I use to describe why we need to put effort into the mechanism. So
Yeah,
use
that's
that
great.
analogy.
No question. Because it's also the player can feel an absolutely striking positive change when let off and drop and the springs and all the regulation points are in. It feels like a new piano. When they're not, given the build quality of the instruments, when they're not, it just feels old.
So I love learning to do stuff by feel. I did
Sloppy or sluggish or something.
I did in Estonia yesterday. It hadn't been serviced for a while. I love those pianos.
Yeah.
Teflon powder on the knuckles and tightened up all the action screws and everything and put it back in. And as often happens in a piano that has light wear, a lot of the notes were blocking. And I love to feel that just by playing the note, and it just let off just by feel. You know, you just
Absolutely.
But you got to play really soft to feel that, especially in the treble.
You do. That's the way I've set let off for about 15 years.
Yeah.
On a stool in front of the piano, just listening to the ghosting and never even looking at the hammers and the strings, just trusting that I can get them. Once I know this piano action, I can get the hammers exactly where I want them by sound, by how heavily they ghost when I do a certain kind of test blow, very soft test blow with my fingers. You know, that's another thing I always bring up in classes, and I always want to bring it up every place. You have to develop like a protocol of test blows to test different things in the action. And be repeatable. You can't, something that's really reliable for you to get the same read every time, and then practice it and use it. Larry, you agree with that? Larry Lobel, you agree with that?
I just asked to unmute him again, and I will just second that and say, you know, I'm not always the best at it, but the one thing that I've noticed is when you do have something that's repeatable, some sort of a spine of a structure to what you do, not only does it help you do it again and again, but it also helps you refine and improve it. Because you're used to doing it the same way, it allows you to tweak the little things that are happening subtly as you go. So definitely second it, just from a general perspective. Phil, you're unmuted. And then I just want to also say, Mark Campbell was the one who said he might have some advice about moving the cap stands, and I unmuted him. So Mark, if you want to jump in whenever, you're welcome to, if you're available. You don't have a video, I see, but it looks like you do have audio. But yeah, Phil, any thoughts on?
No, I was going to ask Larry Lobel.
Oh, okay, Larry Lobel.
His thoughts were on.
Let's unmute Larry.
Yeah,
You're asking about test blows, David?
that's right. Test blows and getting protocols for everything, and developing those protocols as it's just like a hitter or a pool player. They have a protocol, or a golfer. They have a protocol for every single shot. They have a way to do it that they've developed over thousands of hours. And we should do the same thing. You should have, maybe up to half a dozen different test blows for different things you're testing on the action.
I certainly agree with the idea of having protocols, but in a lot of the situations that I work in, you can do that during the time that's where you're not under pressure. But I work under a lot of high pressure situations, and a lot of it is just kind of improvising and coping with whatever the crisis of the moment is.
Right.
You don't always get to follow those protocols.
Right.
Also, as far as testing the piano sound, I rely on playing actual music more than blows. Of course, I use blows as I'm voicing and stuff, but I always try to play something. And I use particular pieces of music that are going to test the different capabilities of the piano. So, you know, pieces with staccato. I try to simulate what the pianist is going to do. I can't come anywhere near what the pianist will do, but I have certain pieces I can play that test for fast repetition, for staccato, different types of playing that the pianist is likely to use. So I always try to implement some of those to make sure that I'm dealing with real music that the piano is going to be subjected to.
That's right. Great point. I'd like to also talk about spring strength, because that is, as I get older and move deeper into the precision of preparing a piano, I really see that the strength of the repetition spring makes a lot of difference. Makes a lot of difference. And there should be no feeling back through the key. You know, there should be no kickback of the spring, but it should be lively. Unless the spring is relatively lively, you're not going to get the repetition you want from that spring. I'm telling you, I've said it every possible way you can said it over the last 35, 40 years. And on the edge of kickback, basically a little slower in the bass, but from the tenor section and then up into the treble, you want it to be lively. You don't want it to be slow. I heard that at the beginning of my career in London Steinway Hall. Yeah, this hammer should rise like a luxurious morning sunrise, and it's like too soft. Too soft. Doesn't give you
maybe
that.
I'm fast forward, yeah. But you know what though? I would the part of the sunrise where you first see the sun, maybe that kind of like oh, there it is, and it just kind of like pops that little light. But I don't know about the rest of the luxurious sunrise. That's a little bit slower.
Well, that's what they meant, slower. And it just never worked out for me. Just never felt as good as a little bit ever. So that's another thing to watch out for.
Yeah, and someone who's more recently, gone through the process of understanding, what's important in regulation and the things that are easy to pass up. The spring strength is really easy for people who haven't done a lot of regulation to just forget about. And it can be so nerve-wracking because it's like, oh, look, I got the hammer line perfect. Oh, this is so wonderful. And then you just play the keys a little bit and it's out of whack. And you go, oh man, now I got to adjust the hammer line again. Right. And all of a sudden, 7 hours later, you go, oh, something to do with the spring strength. So
Yes. And that could have to do with the strength of the repetition arm pinning. It could have to do with so many things. That's why the final 10%, if you have a day or two, is like down in the trenches, man. It's really setting things from the bottom up, and you're building a foundation of function, of excellence. And when you get done and you add the crown jewels of voicing and tuning, then the piano sings. Thomas Zoll's, the longtime Fazioli and Yamaha dealer in Chicago, had his longtime technician, David Graham, who's a great piano technician, does a lot of concert and recording stuff in Chicago. He says it's amazing. He's just one of those piano technicians that he can sit down at a piano for 20 minutes or a half an hour and doesn't seem like he's doing much, and then plays it and walks away from it, and it's like, wow, that sounds a lot better. And then you sit down and feel it, and it's like, wow, that feels a lot better. That's the point you want to get to, where your craft is so intuitive that you can just immediately tell, oh, this needs this, this needs this. Carl, Phil.
I'll take a second. There's been quite a bit of activity in the chat, and I'll kind of go through what's there.
Yeah.
And we'll see. So first of all, let me start with Cy Schuster, because I guess he's maybe switching up his mic or something. So he couldn't be heard while he was saying something. He said, and this goes back to something we were talking about earlier. He puts Teflon powder on knuckles, and then the hammers were blocking. He plays the note very softly, and he can hear that the hammer is blocking on the string before a let off.
Yeah.
So he could force it to escape with more force. I think in reading that, I couldn't process it. Did that make sense to you, David?
Well, sure, you can. It will let off but it's blocking on the string. So it'll go blah, 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 on a soft blow. You don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to bring it slightly off the string.
Got it. Bruce Gibson said, right out of college, he did a regulation on an upright. When he was quote unquote done, he remembered he hadn't tightened the action screws. He tightened them up and blew the regulation, started again, only made that mistake once. Yeah.
Ooh, I've done that more than once. That's terrible.
Yeah. And it's the simple things, that you get foundational steps. Also, you go through those like 37 steps or whatever. And the first step, one of the first steps is like tighten the action screws. It's like, forget that. That's something I could skip that.
Tighten the action screws and make sure.
I will say,
it's in.
David's cutting out a little bit, I'm sure, probably for everybody. So I'll cut in and say something that came up just the other day on our team. Is just tightening the action screws on a piano can make a huge difference. And it can be something that is deceptively valuable for a customer, that if you don't have a lot of time, it's something you can probably charge more than you think you should be able to, because it might be something relatively quick for you to do, but all of a sudden you're done, the piano sits down and the action feels punchier, it feels more responsive. In some senses, it might even feel like they have a new piano. So for those people that don't recognize the value in that, I'll put that out there. David, would you cut out a little?
If you're going to do a day or a day and a half service, the vast majority of pianos I come up to that are eligible and I also repin the shank flanges, because the shank flanges of most pianos I come up to that haven't had any work in a long time and that are somewhere between 10 and 40 years old have basically no friction in the flanges. And if you introduce some friction, the tone gets better, the touch gets better, everything gets better. If you introduce 2 or 3 grams of tension, it's kind of miraculous. Hello?
Oh, sorry, I was talking when I was muted. The comedy of errors here. I actually think we're doing pretty well considering our guest dropped out.
I think we're doing really well.
But I had asked, is there something that you said before you said repin the shank flanges, because you cut out a little bit? Is there something?
Yes, if you're doing a day's worth of work or a day and a half or 2 days worth of work, it's always good to measure the friction on the shank flanges at the very least. And most of them are 0 grams to 1 gram. Most of them are swinging 10, 12, 14 times. That's just, it's too loose. So if they're wooden flanges, you need to repin them.
Perfect. I'll go back to the comments here. So Sai also said another way he sets let off is to push the key very slowly until just before let off, and then play the key very hard from there. If it's too close, there will be no sound. If too far, it will be too loud.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. Phil Bondi said, yes, this is where touch protocol comes into play. Sai, is it true that keys can bobble if springs are too weak? Any thoughts on that? Too weak spring and you still have some sort of bobbling?
Only if the repetition arm is too tight. Then it will bobble no matter what the springs do. I've run into that too on new pianos.
Got it. Annika Byerly said,
Annika.
do you know Annika?
But on the internet, yes.
Awesome. Spring strength, regarding spring strength, discover how much effect rep lever pinning has on the ability to properly set spring strength was a game changer.
Yeah.
It's not something I was really much aware of before we were talking about it. I mean, I know it's important, but just that it's such a key factor that you're considering and think about. David said, but spring speed is a function of hammer shank and rep friction. Larry said, the raising of the hammer should be like the sunrise behind Carl on his background of the little piece of sunrise coming over the earth there. Yeah, I think that's about what I was describing. Susan Klein said, yes, you have a bad trade-off with spring tension and other problems if the flange friction isn't high enough.
Right.
And kind of a couple more comments on that. Sai said, I'm glad to know, David, you prefer to tweak blow over dip for fine aftertouch. That's very helpful. Susan Klein, I have everything. Okay, that's just about being in from COVID. Bruce Gibson, how many spinets? It's almost impossible at times to get those hammers to check at any blow. Yeah, on many spinets. All wonderful tips and tweaks, Nancy says. Thanks. At what point do you recommend a full major regulation for your regularly maintained pianos? Any answers for that?
I would say, how much do they play the piano? If it feels, if you come to the piano and do some test blows and play a little bit and see that the let off is an inch away from the strings and the drop is farther than that, and the let off is, I'm sorry, the aftertouch is too deep, and you know the shanks are resting on the hammer rail, you know, it needs a day of work. It needs a bunch of stuff. If it needs that stuff, it needs other stuff, right? It needs everything to be lubricated.
Do you have a number that you think of? I mean, for like a school piano, of course, it's going to be way more often. But for like a home piano, I often think if your piano hasn't had a full one over the regulation in like 3 or 4 years, you probably should do something. Like just go through it. Right?
It needs a day of work.
Yeah.
The pedals are probably out. God knows what the hammers look like. I mean, it needs a day of work. It needs a good 6, 7, 8 hours of work. And what I do is, okay, I charge my hourly rate, and then I take, because I'm in one place all day and don't have to drive around and dick around with going other places and burning gas and stuff, I charge a day rate. And it's usually 80 to 85% of my retail rate. And that way you can do a day or 2 days of work and still be under a couple of $1,000 and really literally have like a new piano. Really, what 2 days of service can do to a good piano, whether it's an upright or a grand, is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also, I don't know if you remember if you said this explicitly, but for me, I think in recommending regulation and more extensive regulation, I often think before it's too late. You know, there's certain situations where a piano can, again, just coming from a perspective of someone who's been closer to the beginning or the growth period of learning to regulate pianos, there's a temptation to only recommend regulation when that piano is really far out. And it's like, you know, everything's all wacky, so I'm going to fix it. Well, there's a problem there because it's often so wacky that you can't fix it. And so you go in there and you go through all the regulation steps, and it's actually not that much better because, you know, all the felts, you know, are compacted in some weird way. So then when you rotated them, they got off center, and, you know, you adjusted this and you adjusted that, and it just didn't sit right. So it might have even made things worse in a way. So I often look at pianos that they're actually in relatively good shape and say, hey, let's save this before it gets too far out of whack. And then, you know, neaten everything up. It's kind of like what we were talking about, the hammer string grooves. You know, if you've got hammer string grooves that are centered on the hammer, that's good. Then you don't really want to get to the point with a piano where the hammer string grooves are far off from the center, because then you've got to file away the grooves altogether. Carl Lieberman is showing me something. Say what you want to say. Oh, he wants to show these.
Listen, I just bought these scissors online. They're Chinese knockoffs of German scissors. They're $12.95. The company is called Guggenheim, GUGGENHEIN.com. These are the cutest little scissors. They're sharp as can be. They feel great. You know, they're a Chinese knockoff of the $200 German scissors. I love them.
I'm gonna,
I got a pair like that with a different brand name that's the same thing. Sharp, lovely, $12 a piece. I bought like 3 of them. They're awesome.
nice, a rare find considering our previous discussion with Jürgen about the danger of buying cheap Chinese knockoffs.
Yeah,
So these are really good.
Cool, that's good.
these aren't piano tools. They tend to go El Cheapo in piano tools. These
Yeah.
are made for other consumers, so they can't be pieces of merit like most Chinese piano tools are.
David, I'm really proud of us. I think we pull up quite a nice episode here with a change at the last minute. We're
Yeah.
rounding out about 2 minutes left. We're putting the links in the chat to give your feedback, which, you know, still, even though it was a little bit rough, we'd love to hear what you have to say. And also to sign up for next Saturday early if you just want to make sure you get on board, get the notifications. And we're going to do the last installment Wednesday of our 4-part review of Boaz's lecture on voicing. So there's a 120-minute lecture that's private to subscribers only. But if you want to show up live, you can either just pay once or become a $8 a month subscriber, and you can at least see it live. And we'll do a little discussion afterwards. We've been playing around with breaking people out into discussion groups, and, you know, getting a little time to socialize with colleagues and learn some things, pairing people, more expert people with more amateur people, and it's been fun. So join us this Wednesday. There's a sign up link to join us this Wednesday for the final installment of Boaz's lecture on voicing. I'd love to have you there. David, any final comments and words? We actually, a lot of questions are still in the chat, so
Well, that's
do this
awesome.
again. Yeah.
I'll be happy if you and I can pick them out and select some. I'd be happy to answer some to whoever left them in the chat room. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I'll have the chat record, and so I'll just grab that.
And my email address is all over the internet, so you can send me david@davidandersonpianos.com whatever questions you want to, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Very nice.
I'm a nerd, and you know, I'm excited by piano questions. And thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone that paid attention and participated And
Thanks to our special guests who jumped in, Carl and Cy and if Phil, I don't know if Phil's still here. He might jump.
Phil and Larry Lobo.
There.
Yeah, we might pick a topic and have a panel discussion. You know, that could be fun.
I think I've been saying that for a long time. I think it would be a great idea. I think it's a fabulous idea. And
Yeah.
have challenging questions on tap. You know?
Yeah. I think
ETD
that's
and oral.
cool. Say that again,
All
Shaq.
right, my friends.
ETD and what?
The combination, hybrid tuning, oral tuning and tuning devices.
Oh yeah, definitely.
My friends,
Thank you so much.
And if you so desire, we'll see you next week. The brand new slate of characters and awesomeness.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. Thanks for our special guests, and we'll see you, David, next time. It's great.
Get better, Boaz. Get better.
Yes. I'll send out our good thoughts to Boaz.
Bye, guys.
Catch you later.